Let's now move ahead for the Track 1 Masterclass. This session is on Higher Ed's Future, Complementing Work and Life by Professor Vijay Kumar, Dean, Engineering, University of Pennsylvania. The session will be moderated by Dr. Pramath Sinha, Founder and Chairman, Harappa Education. Really excited to be part of this session, so over to you, Pramath.
Thank you, Nikhil, and welcome, Vijay. Thank you very much for doing this. I just want to remind our audience that time permitting, we will end by taking some questions from the audience. So I request you to post your questions on the Q&A channel. We also have a reflection wall, the link to which will be posted in the chat box, and you can contribute to the discussion as well. Please do engage with us by sharing your views. I'm very delighted and privileged to introduce you to Professor Vijay Kumar. We were colleagues long ago when Vijay was a young professor and I was a PhD student at the robotics lab, which was called the GRASP lab at the University of Pennsylvania. And because this is a masterclass, I'm going to ask Vijay to take on the role of the professor and I'll be the student. Vijay is very highly recognized around the world for his work in robotics. The popular way to access his work is to watch a couple of amazing TED Talks which talk about some of the autonomous swarming and flying robots that he and his team have designed. But aside from his career in robotics and the wonderful research and teaching career that he's had and been awarded for his work, Vijay is also an institutional leader. He is today the Dean of Engineering, the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences at the University of Pennsylvania. And he's got appointments in mechanical engineering and applied mechanics, computer and information science, and the electrical and systems engineering department. He also served for some time in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Thank you, Vijay, for taking the time to join us today.
Absolutely. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here. And Pramath, I might just correct your recollections to remind you how old you and I are. We actually went to school together in IIT Kanpur at the same time.
That's true. So this is all, we are all part of the IIT Kanpur mafia. But yes, we are contemporaries in that case, in that sense. But I've always seen you as a senior and a more advanced researcher, at least in my book. Listen, today we are going to talk about the future of work and really how the whole future of work is also impacting the future of higher ed. And what role does that imply for higher ed in beyond just the 4 years or 2 years or 6 years of formal education that traditionally higher ed has been providing, higher educational institutions have been providing? And I know you've thought a lot about this issue, you've talked a lot about this issue. So I'd like to start first with the general question around, how do you see the way people are talking about the future of work, Industry 4.0, evolving careers, technology disruptions, impacting the university and higher education in general? So let's start with that.
Sure. Thank you, Pramath. I mean, I think this is a great way to kick off any substantive discussion. I would just say that if you look at, so again, I come at it from a technology standpoint, but ever since I became the dean of the school, engineering at Penn is part of a bigger ecosystem. And that ecosystem, of course, includes social sciences, the humanities, law, education. And so we think about technology in the broadest possible context. So, but if you focus on technology, you cannot help but notice this exponential growth. Whatever you take on the y-axis, whatever performance measure you use, computing speed, the price of storage, the cost of communication, and there are other things as well, like, for example, the cost of batteries. And this is time, of course, on the x-axis. You get a curve like this, an exponential curve. In the US, we refer to this as a hockey stick curve, because the hockey stick here is the ice hockey stick, which does in fact look like that. Of course, the real hockey sticks that in India we're used to don't look like that. But that aside, it is a hockey stick curve like this. So so what does that mean for us? So as technology rapidly changes, the types of jobs that are being automated continuously change. And of course, if you go to the McKinsey Global website, you'll see a bunch of reports on the future of work. But the important thing that I see is that no matter who you are, what work you're doing, there are elements of your job that'll get automated. And it's really hard to predict what that element will be. And so our traditional thinking was, and 10 years ago, if I can try to ask you to picture a schematic of a pyramid. So the pyramid is the job pyramid. Mm-hmm. At the bottom of the pyramid, lots and lots of jobs, easy to qualify for those jobs. The jobs don't pay a lot, and this is the menial labor, right? And as you go up the pyramid, presumably you need advanced degrees. And on the top are perhaps the CEOs, get paid lots and lots of money, not a lot of people who are at the top. And presumably the qualifications that are required to get to the top are more and more. So that's something we associate with. And that's why we're talking about higher education here, because we want to see people go from the bottom all the way to the top.
Correct.
But the reality is when automation enters the picture, this pyramid gets destroyed. There are elements of this pyramid that just get automated. And so you might have the training and suddenly you discover that your job's being automated. And the paradoxical thing is that it's not necessarily jobs at the bottom that are being automated. So for example, you look at the manual laborers, you look at those that, maybe clean your houses, yes, hospitals, those jobs are still being done manually. It's jobs in the middle that are disappearing.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So I think that's what higher education has to prepare itself for, as we think about how to educate people and how to make them robust to this upheaval.
So you almost have a pyramid that is collapsing, right? Or visually not collapsing, but there are huge holes that are getting developed, where you have areas where the entire skill set is becoming automated, or the entire job or function is getting automated.
Yeah, and you don't want to be at the center of that hole.
Right. Yeah. And is it even true that then, and the roles in what remain are changing a lot, right? They are becoming very different from what they were before.
Yeah, I think so. Something that we can all relate to is ride sharing. We all use ride sharing cars, right? So
like
if you think
the Olas and the Ubers of the world.
Yeah, the Olas, the Ubers, the DDs if you're in China. So the dream was, and this goes back maybe 15 years ago, that we'll have self-driving cars. There'll be no humans. You can get to place wherever you want. And of course, as a technologist, I believe someday it might be possible. As a realist, I believe we're nowhere close to that. Not in my lifetime, at least, we won't see that. But what has that done, right? If you look at the things that have been automated, it's basically the higher level algorithms that used to be the role of in the US, they call the person a dispatcher, a taxi dispatcher, who basically says, okay, there's a call here. I want you to pick this one up and then go pick up that one. That part is automated. But what is not automated is the lower level of driving. So all of a sudden, we are performing the menial chores of driving crowded streets, which is a terribly all-consuming job, and we're doing that to earn money, while somebody above us with all the automation is making a lot of money because we're drivers at the bottom level. And so that's what I meant by saying you don't want to be over here, because your job will disappear and then you'll move down to make sure you can earn money.
And you have to, ideally you would want to move up, not down.
Exactly.
Right. So how do you move up? And I connect this to an earlier discussion, our opening keynote was with Ajay Piramal, who heads one of the largest conglomerates in India. And it was an interesting discussion because he was talking a lot about how he is using data analytics and data science in his business. He just acquired a large insurance company that had gone into bankruptcy. And he was using data science, and he used a very compelling example of how he assessed the health of their assets and the portfolio that this insurance company had. And so that naturally led to the discussion where some of us, or some people, feel a little bit threatened by all of this automation and say, well, all jobs go away, and what's going to remain? Now, obviously, his very practical view was, hey, while my guys could use data analytics and software to analyze large amounts of data, which was earlier not possible for us to do as humans, I still need people who can think and analyze and design and figure out and use judgment and interpretation and so on. And so there's still need for higher order skills, if you will, to make use of the data. And so from his standpoint, that's where he wants the talent that he would like to induct into his company. Am I making sense from the movement standpoint?
I mean, totally. I could not agree more with what he said. I think data science is changing the way we view the world. And Pramath, you're an engineer. You probably remember your first course in physics. That's probably the first time you were exposed to calculus. And I know for me, calculus was oh my God, what is this? Do I really need this? And maybe I shouldn't be an engineer after all. And so today, if Sir Isaac Newton were to be alive, and if you permit the exaggeration in the technology scale, let's suppose he had an iPhone. Well, he would take a picture of an apple falling from the tree and come up with a completely different way of describing gravity, which is data-based, right? So that's really the power of this field. And of course, in the business community has embraced this a lot faster because they've seen the potential for in the P&L statement. But this is changing every aspect of our lives. So today, if there's one skill I would urge people to pick up, it's the ability to be data savvy. The idea you should learn how to understand large data sets, manipulate them, visualize them. Of course, not everybody can be a computer scientist, but at least some expertise in the area of data science, I think, is valuable.
Do you find that educational institutions are responding fast enough to these changes that are happening? Because that's one question that keeps coming up, that are institutions and is the education system responding fast enough? Especially because you see a lot of these education or ed tech players coming in and offering, say, data science and AI and ML and digital marketing courses, seemingly to make up for the gap or for the reskilling. And does that present an opportunity for education, or is that a threat, or it's fine, they are filling a gap? How do you see that from an educational institution perspective?
I think this is something I think about constantly. I think in one sense, we're ahead of that curve because if you look at the edtech companies and what they're coming up with, the platforms such as for online education, invariably you find that those are university spin-offs. So people who are ahead of the curve and who are seeing the challenges with traditional educational models and
that's
coming
an
up
interesting point, Vijay, not to interrupt you, but you're right. I mean, I never thought of it that way, but they are all university spin-offs.
Yeah. So if you look at the two biggest online platforms, edX and Coursera, edX is now part of 2U. I mean, they're all based on academics.
Sure. No, please carry on. Sorry, make the point. But I thought that was an insightful point. Go ahead.
Yeah. So at least in the U.S., institutions of higher education has had a big influence on how technology is developed and how innovations happen. So in that sense, I'm not worried about it. But the model that we have is a very, very traditional model in the sense that, you bring students in, we teach 4-year programs, then a master's, then a PhD. At the undergraduate level, I don't know how much innovation we want to do, because if you remember when you were growing up in IIT, as I was growing up, I think the first few years are formative. It's not just about what you learn in the classroom, but it's also what you learn from your peers, where you live. There's a cultural awakening, if you will. And so maybe it's fine. Maybe the traditional models work. And then again, at the top, the PhD, so we both have PhDs, I'd be hard pressed to say, well, we got to totally change the way we do a PhD degree, because by definition, that's about pushing the frontier of knowledge, and that's where innovation happens. But what about something in between? And I think that's where a lot of the edtech companies are coming up and trying to fill the gap. I think there's a need to continuously keep learning. I think many of us, and I know, Pramath, from you, I've learned this from you, that in India, there are many institutions that will offer 4-year degree programs. And there are a number of students who are not properly equipped to meet the challenges of the 21st century. And so the question is there a way to develop educational models that at scale can teach students the essential skills? So this assumes that they would have that solid foundation of a 4-year degree program and perhaps a broad-based thinking, which includes not just technology, but also the liberal arts, which I think is important. But then on top of that, what do you build? And by that time, it can be customized. You can have boot camps. You can have very, very focused certificate programs. So we ourselves have online degree programs that we offer to graduates who have been out in the workforce, maybe in their late 20s, early 30s, who suddenly realized, oh my God, the world is changing. My job is changing. I'd better go back and get reskilled. So I think there's a lot of room for innovation at that level.
So this leads to the next question that I had, right? So if you take some examples of how you are thinking about extending into that model, how are you thinking about the universities and educational institutions extending their model or stretching their model, if you will, to cover that? And I know that you've been doing a lot of different things, so it'll be interesting to hear that from an administrator's perspective. How do you decide, and what are the kinds of things you're looking at?
Well, there are things that we're trying to do now, and then the things that we will be doing in the future.
Both would be fascinating to hear about.
Yeah. So one thing, I'll just go back to the last few years, and I don't want to say we're in the post-pandemic era. I think we're still in the midst of a pandemic, but COVID essentially subject all of us to perhaps the biggest experiment that we could have been part of, right? Obviously the technology level, but the social level, at the lessons in biology. Now everybody understands what viruses are, what an mRNA vaccine means. So I think we just totally redid everything, in particular in the educational institutions. So this has just accelerated the adoption of developing online programs. And so, for example, one thing we've done is taken our on-campus computer science program, which was designed for people who did not have a background in computer science. In fact, if you apply to MCIT, that's the name of the program, and if you have a computer science degree, you'll be automatically denied admission. This is solely for people who might come from an economics background, a psychology background, from a history background, but now they say, well, I really need to learn this stuff. So we took that program, and so that program admitted maybe 50 students a year, and now we're at 1,500 students. So just the 10x, 20x, 30x increase because we can do it online. We no longer have to think about class sizes. We still think about student-faculty ratios, and we try to maintain the same ratio. But because we have technology assisting us, we can amplify what an individual faculty member can do. So we've done that to reach out to people who may have graduated from Penn, but now we're offering a very, very low-cost alternative to an on-campus master's program. I think the second thing we're now exploring is how do we reach out to alumni and basically say, okay, now you've had a degree from Penn, You pay a lot of money. Penn, for those of you who don't know, is an Ivy League institution, charges Ivy League tuition. And so that's an expensive investment in your future. But I liken it to sort of buying an iPhone. So you buy an iPhone, very expensive, and that iPhone lasts about 4 years. And we've become accustomed to just tossing it away and buying a new iPhone. Well, I don't know that you can afford to do that with higher education. So the question we're asking is, are there sort of updates to your iPhone that you can provide? And the analogy being online certificate programs, online boot camps, which we can offer at relatively low cost and continue to engage our alumni and help them adopt to the changing technological landscape. So those are a few things we're doing immediately.
So it seems to me that there are two distinct opportunities for universities from what you're saying, which is offering lower cost programs to people who have so far not been or would like to get into a new area or an upcoming area and skill themselves. And these may be people who come from very diverse or different disciplines. And may not have the time or luxury or may not make it to a full-time on-campus program, which is typically very competitive and hard to get into. And then you're saying, so that's one thing, which is the reskilling, upskilling of those folks. But then there is this opportunity which everybody is talking about, which is lifelong learning. And Chris Daly from Harvard is going to talk about his thesis on the 60-year curriculum. And he talks about the fact that, we are all going to work longer, live longer, work longer, and therefore need to learn longer. So I think the second part of what you said is really building towards that, isn't it? That you now don't just fet alumni for fundraising and for them to show up at homecoming, but really give them that 60-year curriculum.
Yeah, no, I think so well said. It's a 60-year curriculum for sure. And I think it's our role as a university to be thinking beyond a 4-year horizon. This should be part of our responsibility. And it's also about lowering the barrier to entry. So we lower the barrier to entry in 3 ways. This is firstly a low-cost way of doing things. The degree program costs 1/3 what our regular students have to pay on campus. Second, as you mentioned, the barrier to entry, which is I got to give up my job, pack up my bags, and travel to Philadelphia. And if you're in California, sunny California, it's hard to attract those people because they no longer want to be in a Philadelphia winter, which can be pretty brutal. So there's that barrier. And then the third thing is just making it accessible to people. So what we want is someone with the maturity, with the persistence, and with the basic smarts, not necessarily somebody who has scored A's in a bunch of classes, which may no longer be relevant. So in that sense, we're expanding the scope. And you're totally right. I think engaging alumni is very important. Certainly as a dean, I think about philanthropy, I think about fundraising, but the first rule to philanthropy is you want people to be engaged. And if you can be at the center of your students, your alumni's universe for a longer period of time, for 60 years, that's terrific, right?
Yeah. Vijay, we are down to the last 5 minutes, but I do want to pick up a provocative question, which Aparna is asking. So do you think Ivy League institutions and their equivalents like IITs and IIMs are redundant in the future?
I don't believe so. In fact, more than ever, I feel that sort of COVID has exposed a weakness in our educational system. At least I see it in the US. And if anything, it's heightened the role that, if I may be so brash and call Ivy League institutions elite institutions, I think it's just highlighted the role that elite institutions need to play in the US. I'm sure the same is true in India. And I'll just say, and they're elite, not because somehow they're built of gold or ivory, but because they attract the best talent. So if you have institutions that attract the best talent, certainly that's the place where new ideas will come And those are the places where, you can have maximal impact. So in that sense, it's become more and more important. And if technology allows you to expand the footprint of your impact, then just follow that argument, and fewer institutions are needed to have the same amount of impact. So I do believe as technology goes up, I think fewer institutions can have the same amount of impact. So if anything, I would say the IITs and IIMs are better placed to have an impact in India.
You had another idea which was kind of caught my attention when we were speaking earlier, and maybe you can mention that about the use of infrastructure and how.
Yeah. It just amazes me. So again, so we're a private institution. So every time we have to invest in the latest and greatest biotechnology, nanotechnology facilities, we have to fundraise for it, and we have to spend out of our operating budget. This is an expensive endeavor. And but we're living in the 20th century, literally, because the people who can access those facilities are only those that can come into the facility physically. So the question I naturally ask is, with all this cloud-based infrastructure that's now being developed, and I think edtech companies can here play a big role, could we somehow geographically network these facilities? Could we expand the learning opportunities for students, not just across the country, but across the world? And so that's one of the long-term things that we're working on. And still a lot needs to be done. I think, during COVID, we tried to do labs remotely. We created kits. We shipped off kits for students to do experiments in their homes. That was, I don't know, it was just a feel-good exercise. Yes, it did have an impact, don't get me wrong, but I think a lot more could be done. And so the question I ask is, yes, we can take lecture-based classes remotely. Why can't we take lab-based classes remotely? And so once you start doing that, I think there's just a whole new a route for having for innovation and impact.
I love the idea, Vijay, also because in countries like India, where we are short on infrastructure and short on resources, you can really optimize the use of existing infrastructure and capacity, which is in a way lying idle and is not being fully utilized in a country that is in bad need of it. But really, thank you so much for joining us today, and it's been great listening to you as always. I'm really grateful that you could spare the time, and I certainly look forward to talking more about this and bringing you back at some point. Thank you so much, and all the very best, Vijay.
Yeah, it was a pleasure and an honor to speak to all of your to the friends who are attending this meeting. And Pramath, let's be in touch again.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Vijay.